After a long and eventful life, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, has died at the age of 99. Philip was by some distance the longest-serving royal consort in British history, a role that he'd made his own.
There was no precedent, but if I asked somebody what you expect me to do, they all looked blank. They had no idea. Nobody had much idea.
From the day of his marriage to the future Queen, and throughout her long reign, he was at her side in good times and bad.
He has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
In this extended programme, we'll be looking at the Duke's remarkable life and reporting on the many tributes from around the world. We'll take a look at the Duke's influence as a father, grandfather and great-grandfather over several decades. And we'll mark the great success of the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme for young people, just one of the achievements being praised by political leaders today.
Like the expert carriage driver that he was, he helped to steer the royal family and the monarchy so that it remains an institution indisputably vital to the balance and happiness of our national life.
In recent years, Philip was rarely seen in public. He'd retired from public duties in 2017 after 70 years of service. He was last seen as he returned home to Windsor on the 16th of March after a month-long stay in hospital. And the loss will be felt most keenly today by his widow, the Queen, whose reign has been sustained by his advice and constant presence. Good evening. It was at midday that Buckingham Palace announced the news that Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, had died at the age of 99. The longest-serving royal consort in British history, a man of strong views and a strong sense of duty, was within weeks of celebrating his 100th birthday. In a statement, Buckingham Palace said this: "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course." The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss. Prince Philip, at the Queen's side for over 70 years, was one of the most prominent figures in public life, and tributes to the Duke have come from around the world, led here in the United Kingdom by the Prime Minister Boris Johnson. We'll have the story of the Duke's life and the causes that he backed. Before that, let's have a word with our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell. And Nick, before we talk about character and before we talk about causes or any of that, let's focus on the loss that the Queen has suffered.
Huw, a major figure has left the national stage today, 2 months and 1 day short of what would have been his 100th birthday. Now, it's not a surprise, given his age, given his evident frailty when we saw him leaving King Edward VII Hospital rather less than a month ago. But it is a moment of sadness, and it is a great personal loss, above all, of course, for the Queen. Hers is a more solitary path now. She will be sustained, I'm sure, by her Christian faith and by the other members of her family. There can be no question, I think, of her withdrawing now. One must suppose that she will have prepared for this day. I was told that she thought she'd lost him back in 2011 when he had heart pains and was taken to Papworth Hospital. So not a surprise, but it will nonetheless be a considerable emotional shock after so many decades to realise that he is no longer there. There will have been the consolation of the time they've spent together at Windsor over the past year in the lockdown, and now, of course, there will be so many memories.
We will be looking at his activities over the years in terms of charities and causes. We'll be talking about his character, we'll be talking about his legacy. How will history view this man?
How do you assess a contribution made over 70 years, for 73 years indeed, as husband, for nearly 70 years as her consort? And it is his support which I think has made an incalculable contribution to the success and the stability of her reign. One person who has known them for many decades said to me, she could not have done it without him. And in many ways, this reign has been a partnership between the two of them, even though, of course, he had no constitutional role himself. Now, it was bumpy and difficult for him back in the 1950s. He did find it very challenging, the fact that he had no clear role. It was all trial and error, he said. But he found a role for himself, and in so many ways it was a pioneering role on the environment, the Duke of Edinburgh's award, technology, spiritual matters, and so on. He made a real contribution in his own right to the life of this nation and indeed around the Commonwealth. But most of all, he brought his strength, and I use that word deliberately. We're familiar with the Queen's expression, my strength and stay, but she said, my constant strength and guide at the time of the Diamond Jubilee. He brought his strength in support of the Queen and the British monarchy.
Nick, many thanks. We'll be talking again in a short while. Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent there, giving us a sense of some of the themes that we'll need to be talking about in the next hour, because you're watching an extended edition of BBC News at 6. We'll be marking this significant milestone in British public life by reporting on today's tributes and the reaction, and looking at the areas in which the Duke was most influential, the legacy he leaves. But we'll start with this account of the Duke's notable life story with Nicholas Witchell.
First after them, her husband, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who, with his hands between the hands of the Queen, becomes her liege man of life and limb and of earthly worship. In the name
At
of
the
God.
Queen's coronation, he was the first person after the bishops to pay homage to her. Philip knelt before his wife and pledged his loyalty.
Faith and truth I will bear unto you, live and die.
And so,
Against all manner of
rising, touches the crown upon her head and kisses her upon the left cheek.
As a male consort to a female sovereign, Philip had no constitutional significance. Yet no one was closer to the monarchy or of greater importance to the monarch than he was. By instinct he was a leader, yet Philip had always to take second place. By nature he spoke his mind, and that sometimes got him into trouble. Yet for decade after decade, his was the support that mattered most to the throne. Philip was born in Corfu in 1921. His family was part of European royalty. He was a prince of Greece, but his ancestors were largely Danish, German and Russian. Philip had a rootless childhood. His family was banished from Greece, his parents separated, and he was sent to Gordonston School in northern Scotland. The Spartan atmosphere there suited him. As the Second World War loomed, Philip was an 18-year-old Royal Navy cadet at Dartmouth.
His Majesty walking down the ranks of the cadets.
And when the King and Queen visited the college, they brought with them their 13-year-old daughter, Princess Elizabeth. According to witnesses, Philip showed off a great deal, but the meeting had made a deep impression on the princess. Philip served in the Royal Navy with distinction during the war. When the fighting ended, he started to escort Elizabeth to family gatherings. He changed his name to Philip Mountbatten and became a British citizen. The public realised there was a romance. Yet within Buckingham Palace, Philip was regarded with suspicion. One courtier wrote privately that he was rough, uneducated, and would probably not be faithful. But Elizabeth was deeply in love, and in the summer of 1947, the palace announced their engagement.
It is with the greatest pleasure that the King and Queen announced the betrothal of their dearly beloved daughter, the Princess Elizabeth, to Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten, RN.
On the 20th of November 1947, the newly created Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, stood within Westminster Abbey and exchanged marriage vows with the heir to the British throne.
I, Philip.
I, Philip.
Take thee, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary.
Take thee, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary.
To my wedded wife.
To my wedded wife.
Again and again the people called for Elizabeth and Philip. Again and again they joyfully responded.
In 1952, the couple set off on a tour of the Commonwealth. The King came with them to the airport. It was the last time they were to see King George VI, who, unknown to his daughter, was in the final stages of lung cancer.
It was a farewell. It was also, as events turned out, goodbye.
It was at a hunting lodge in Kenya that Philip told his wife of her father's death. Someone who was there said Philip looked as though half the world had dropped on him. They returned to London to lead the national mourning.
And now here is the Queen.
His wife was now Queen. Philip was there in support, but he was never given the title Prince Consort, and his role was undefined. He channeled some of his restless energy into a boisterous social life. He and a group of male friends met every week in rooms above a restaurant in London's Soho. There were long convivial lunches, visits to nightclubs, and glamorous companions. By the 1960s, Philip's life was more settled. He and the Queen had completed their family with 2 more children, Andrew and Edward, who joined Charles and Anne, and he had found a new role for himself.
Is it the 18th we're due back now?
18th.
From his office in the palace, he promoted issues in which he had a personal interest.
40 minutes to get round the world. Well, it's going to be a bit of a rush. It may leave you a little bit muddled.
Yet diplomacy seemed alien to him. He urged British industry to pull its finger out and complained on American television that the royal family didn't have enough money.
Inevitably, if nothing happens, we shall either have to, I don't know, we may have to move into smaller premises, who knows?
He blundered on a state visit to China with the Queen. He made what he thought was a private remark about slitty eyes. It was a diplomatic gaffe which dominated the headlines and added to his reputation for making misjudged remarks.
It's all right, Snip.
Yet Philip had a sharp, inquiring mind and was determined to make a contribution of his own. The groundbreaking 60s film Royal Family was made largely at his instigation because he felt it was time for the family to show a more human face to the world.
The salad is ready.
Good.
And for many years he toured the globe as president of the then World Wildlife Fund, speaking out about the need to conserve nature.
We depend on being part of the web of life. We depend on every other living thing on this planet, just as much as they depend on us.
He promoted technology, helped underprivileged children, and had a lifelong interest in spiritual issues. But his most lasting creation was the scheme named after him, the Duke of Edinburgh's award, which encouraged young people to realise their potential.
To give young people a chance to discover their own abilities for themselves as an introduction to the responsibilities and interests of the grown-up world, and incidentally, to make new friends and have a great deal of fun and satisfaction in the process.
Believe it.
No decade was more difficult for the royal family than the 1990s. The death of Diana, Princess of Wales, was both a family tragedy and a moment of tension for the monarchy. It was the Queen to whom the country looked for public comfort. It was Philip to whom the Queen turned for private support.
And still Prince William, with his head hung, walking next to his grandfather.
It was Philip whose gentle encouragement had persuaded William and Harry to walk behind their mother's coffin to her funeral. And, contrary to his sometimes insensitive image, it had been Philip who'd taken the lead in trying to understand the domestic problems of his children, prompted perhaps by his own memories of what it's like to marry into the royal family. Philip remained physically active at an age when most men would have relished retirement. He went carriage driving, and he was still carrying out more engagements than many younger members of the family. Some he did alone, such as this visit to British troops in Iraq.
How did you get into this?
But most he did with his wife. He was the figure a few paces behind the Queen, always looking out for her, and often guiding children through the barriers to present their flowers to her. By the time of his 90th birthday in June 2011, celebrated at his insistence with little fanfare, he'd accepted that it was time to slow down a little.
I reckon I've done my bit. I want to enjoy myself for a bit now. With less responsibility, less frantic rushing about, less preparation, less trying to think of something to say. On top of that, memories going. I can't remember names and things. Yes, I'm just sort of winding down.
There was little immediate evidence, though, of any winding down. Despite a serious health scare at Christmas 2011, when he had to be taken to hospital with a blocked coronary artery, he remained at the Queen's side for most of her Diamond Jubilee programme, which took them the length and breadth of the country. It wasn't until 2017 that the Duke, then aged 96, carried out his final solo engagement. It was a parade for the Royal Marines on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace. It was pouring with rain, but, as ever, duty took priority. He took his time meeting those on parade and taking the salute as the Marines marched past to bid him farewell. His life after that was much quieter, spent mostly at the Queen's estate at Sandringham. It was there in January 2019, while he was driving himself from the estate, that he survived a serious road accident. His vehicle overturned, he was badly shaken, and he surrendered his driving licence shortly afterwards. By now he was rarely seen in public. There were occasional appearances at family occasions such as weddings, yet he remained a supportive figure to the Queen and his family. The last sight of him was last month, leaving hospital in London after a month-long stay. He'd undergone treatment for an unspecified heart condition and he looked frail. While he'd been in hospital, the Queen had had to deal with the aftermath of the Sussexes' US television interview without her husband at her side. Throughout his adult life, despite the formality of his position, Philip retained his own style of doing things. He made his own uncompromising mark on national life. He once summed up his approach in characteristically forthright fashion.
I've just done what I think is my best. I can't suddenly change my whole way of doing things. I can't change my interests. I can't change the way in which I react to things. It's part of... That's somebody's style, and it's too bad. You've got to lump it.
Throughout all the monarchy's many ups and downs since the Second World War, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, the longest-serving consort in British history, was the restless outsider who put his wife and duty first. In doing so, he fulfilled his coronation oath of allegiance to Elizabeth, his Queen. Their marriage and his support were the essential foundations which underpinned the success of her reign. In a speech to celebrate their golden wedding anniversary, the Queen spoke of the debt that she and the country owed him.
He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
The words of Her Majesty the Queen, ending that report by our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell, recounting the story of the Duke's eventful and remarkable life. Just after midday today, the flags were lowered at Buckingham Palace, so we'll be talking to our correspondent Sarah Campbell in just a moment. First, we'll go to Windsor, where the Duke passed away this morning. Our correspondent Helena Wilkinson is there. So many memories in Windsor. It's fair to say, Helena, with lots of big crowds there on occasion. Clearly, the current restrictions have an effect on all of that. So I suppose it's quiet reflection there today.
Yes, that's absolutely right, Huw. This is a town that's seen, as you say, many royal events over the years, both happy and sad events. But today, not surprising, it has been a sombre mood, a reflective mood here at the castle. And as the news of the Duke's death rippled through this royal town, many locals came here outside the castle to reflect and remember, share memories. Some also came to lay flowers just outside of the castle behind us here. We spoke to a young boy called Oscar. He had written a card and he said in that card, "Your Majesty, so sorry about hearing about your amazing husband." Another lady who we spoke to earlier has said, "It's so sad, I just wanted him to get to 100 years old." The Duke, of course, just a couple of months away from his 100th birthday, and it was here where the Duke of Edinburgh spent his last days. He was discharged from hospital 3 weeks ago, reunited with the Queen here, and they spent much of the last year isolating together because of the pandemic, quietly celebrating the Duke's 99th birthday last year, quietly celebrating their 73rd wedding anniversary. But in the castle here this evening, Huw, the Queen, now a widow, in mourning for her husband, a husband who was by her side always for so many years.
Eleanor, thank you very much. And we'll go from Windsor to central London and to Buckingham Palace. And our royal correspondent, Sarah Campbell, is there. And Sarah, again, the focus of crowds on days like this in the past, when there's been mourning, especially on a national level, you'd see far more people. But it's interesting today, of course, that the palace has appealed to people not to turn up simply for public health reasons.
You're right, Hugh, and I think, you know, the deaths of many thousands of people over the last year perhaps haven't been celebrated in the way that their friends and families would have liked due to the pandemic, and Prince Philip's will be no different. It was tradition that the death announcement was brought out on an easel and placed behind the railings here at Buckingham Palace, but instead of remaining there for many hours, it was taken down after about an hour, and that was due to a fear of attracting crowds. I mean, people have continued to come here and leave flowers all afternoon with messages, many saying thank you to the Duke for his 70 years of service to the country. And people of all ages really have been here. They've wanted to stop and remember him. I spoke to one young woman who said something which I think probably lots of people will be feeling. She said, "He meant something to me. He's been part of my life since I was born." But as much as people want to come to places like this and remember him, as you say, they're being asked not to. They're being asked not to gather at royal residences. There will be a book of condolence, but it's online only. And people are being asked to consider giving a donation to charity instead of leaving flowers. Now, the arrangements for the Duke's funeral will be made public when they've been finalised, when they've been approved by the Queen, but I think it's clear that the pandemic will affect the royal family's plans to honour Prince Philip, as I say, in a way that many, many families have had to deal with as well over the past year.
Sarah, many thanks. Sarah Campbell there for us, our royal correspondent at Buckingham Palace. Well, I mentioned that flags on many buildings, indeed all government buildings across the UK, are being flown at half-mast to mark the Duke's death. Politicians will deliver their own tributes when Parliament is recalled at Westminster on Monday. And all campaigning for May's elections has been suspended for the time being. And as we were reporting there, the government is asking people not to gather or leave flowers at royal residences because of the current restrictions and to minimise travel. Our royal correspondent Daniela Relf reports now on the reaction so far to the news of the Duke's death.
The Union flag at half-mast, above the palace where he had spent so much of his working life, and placed on the gates the official announcement of the Duke of Edinburgh's death.
It is to Her Majesty and her family that our nation's thoughts must turn today, because they have lost not just a much-loved and highly respected public figure, but a devoted husband and a proud and loving father, grandfather, and in recent years, great-grandfather.
His presence and significance in British national life recognised in the tributes.
The UK has lost an extraordinary public servant in Prince Philip. He dedicated his life to our country. And above all, I think he'll be remembered for his support and devotion to the Queen. And all of our thoughts are with the Queen, the royal family and the British public as they come together to mourn this huge loss.
Memories of an extraordinary man. A note amongst the flowers left at Windsor, where he died this morning. But the remembrance has gone way beyond this royal town.
On behalf of the Welsh Government and people in all parts of Wales, I offer our deepest condolences to Her Majesty the Queen, Her Majesty's children and their families on this sad occasion.
It is with deep sadness that I have learned of the death of His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh. It is a sadness that I know will be shared by countless others in Northern Ireland and right across the world.
When any family loses a loved one, it's really difficult, and whilst they may be public figures, they are also a family that are hurting, so I just wanted to extend my condolences to them.
At the Queen's official residence in Scotland, the formal announcement and personal memories.
He had a close association, of course, with Scotland. He went to school in Scotland. I know that he enjoyed all of the time he spent at Balmoral. He had a very long association as Chancellor with the University of Edinburgh. But probably above all of that, the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme transformed the lives and gave hope and inspiration to countless numbers of young people.
It was back in July that we last saw the Duke of Edinburgh on an official engagement in Windsor. A rare public appearance and a reminder of his role within royal life.
Prince Philip sums up a life lived well and ended well. And I would say across the nation we can look at this life, feel a deep sense of pride, a deep sense of admiration and gratitude.
The royal family will grieve in private for now, but tonight on the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's charity website, a message that thanks the Duke of Edinburgh for his service, saying he'll be greatly missed. He had remained a memorable public figure for so many.
I want to pay respect to Prince Philip because I really like the royal family and I just feel very bad for them, what happened.
I suppose it was inevitable for a man who's 99 years of age that this will be the final outcome, but it's sad.
He's been a good guy for the country, and the royal family, and everything. He's served in the forces as well, which is good, like most of the royal family. And I'll miss him.
At York Minster, the bells have been rung 99 times as a mark of respect for the Duke's 99 years. It is a tribute that will be repeated across the UK for a man who held a unique place in public life.
Just a sense of some of the reaction across the UK today. That was Daniela Ralph reporting there. We heard from the Prime Minister earlier. He gave that statement outside number 10 Downing Street soon after the news came through at midday. Let's go to Laura Kuenssberg, our political editor in Downing Street. MPs will get their chance to pay tributes on Monday, Laura.
That's right, Hugh. There'll be a special session of the House of Commons coming back a day early from their Easter break on Monday for MPs to pay tribute and show their respects. There's already been a meeting of Cabinet Ministers this afternoon called together that's just finished when heartfelt tributes were paid. And crucially, also, election campaigns in Scotland, Wales and parts of England have been suspended for now. Really normal political business has been put on pause. That is, of course, first and foremost, a mark of respect. But I think it's also an acknowledgement that while our unwritten constitution may not have given Prince Philip an official technical role, there's widespread acknowledgement right across the political spectrum of the importance of what he did and offered to the Queen as her support through all of those years, and in that regard as a real service to the nation. And that's something that politician after politician have acknowledged very publicly and with real emotion this afternoon. And it's extraordinary to think that Prince Philip was born when Lloyd George was in charge here in Downing Street nearly a century ago. His extraordinary life spanned the administrations of 20 prime ministers, and during so much of that he was part of the very fabric of this country. A note and a reminder perhaps of the permanence of the monarchy, such a contrast to the thrash of daily political life.
Indeed, Laura. Thank you very much. Laura Kuenssberg, our political editor there, with thoughts in Downing Street. Now, Prince Philip pledged at his marriage in 1947 to give lifelong support to his wife. After she ascended the throne in 1952, he was then a permanent presence at her side. His sense of duty and service has been mentioned in many of today's tributes, including by President Biden, who offered his condolences and said that the Duke's legacy would live on through all the charitable endeavours that he had shaped. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale reports on reaction around the world to the Duke's death.
The Duke went off on his own the next morning. As alone, that is.
For more than 70 years, the Duke of Edinburgh crisscrossed the world, sometimes at the Queen's side, sometimes on his own, leaving an international legacy that was reflected in the global tributes paid today.
And now breaking news from the UK. The royal family has issued a statement.
From NBC. Across the world, his death made the headlines. From America, President Biden sent his deepest condolences. From his service during World War II to his 73 years alongside the Queen and his entire life in the public eye, Prince Philip, he said, gladly dedicated himself to the people of the UK, the Commonwealth, and to his family. And it was to the Commonwealth that the Duke travelled so often, sometimes marking members' journeys from empire to independence, sometimes renewing friendships with others where the Queen is head of state.
You should have seen His Royal Highness at the last Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting that took place here in the United Kingdom, both at Windsor and in the Buckingham Palace. It was extraordinary. He was the heart and the soul, and I think he will be greatly missed. He brought spice and excitement wherever he went, and I don't think we'll see the like of him again.
In Australia, a Commonwealth country the Duke visited more than 20 times, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, said he embodied a generation that we will never see again. The Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, said Prince Philip will be fondly remembered for the encouragement he gave to so many young New Zealanders through his Duke of Edinburgh awards scheme.
40 minutes to get round the world. Well, it's going to be a bit of a rush. It may leave you...
The Duke had a global perspective, even presenting a television programme about his travels, but also representing Britain at memorials for a world war in which he played an active part. Chancellor Merkel said his friendship with Germany would not be forgotten. President Macron of France said he lived an exemplary life defined by bravery and duty. Greek-born, of Danish blood, the Duke was an elder statesman of European royalty. In a telegram to the Queen, the Spanish royal family said, "Dear Aunt Lilibet, we're deeply saddened to hear about the passing away of dear Uncle Philip." One place, of course, where the Duke may be especially missed is the island of Tanna in the southwest Pacific, where he was worshipped by some as a god.
James Landale there with the global perspective. It's just turned 6:30 p.m. and you're watching an extended edition of BBC News at 6. And if you're waiting for the news where you are, well, here's a promise. It'll be on for you at 7 o'clock. So it's coming up after this with all the day's news, plus, of course, reaction in all of the areas across the UK to today's news from Windsor Castle. And then at 7:30, there will be a special tribute programme hosted by my colleague Sophie Rayworth. That is all to come. But I'm joined once again by our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell. What I really wanted to ask now, Nick, was about the decisions that have to be made, some of them practical, logistical decisions to do with the days ahead. What can we tell viewers about that?
Well, I think it is just common sense, Huw, and people will understand that much of this has been planned in advance. It has to be. At the moment, that single bell that we saw is tolling at Westminster Abbey. There will be gun salutes in London tomorrow. The palace is very sharply aware of the COVID restrictions on crowds gathering. So I think we can say that there will be no large-scale funeral. That's just completely out of the question. And that would be what he, the Duke, will have wanted. No fuss will have been his instruction, I'm quite sure, and that is how it is going to be. As Sarah was saying, the palace is asking people not to leave flowers. There are online books of condolences are being opened, and the palace is asking people to make a donation either to a charity of their choice or to one of the charities supported by the Duke. So let us imagine that there will be a funeral at Windsor. I think that's a pretty safe bet. I would have thought in about a week or so. But there will still be work to do in the interim. None of this, I should stress, is confirmed, but I think that that's probably the way we will discover things are. And the royal family will come together, an essentially family funeral, to pay tribute to a husband, a father, a grandfather, and a great-grandfather. And, of course, I would think that a grandson will come from America. Prince Harry will come for that funeral to be reunited with the rest of his family so that they can together pay tribute to the Duke of Edinburgh.
And again, Nick, this is difficult, I know, because of the circumstances we're in, but when we think about the kind of service that would have been planned, the kind of people who would have been invited or who would expect to be invited, would the form of the service and the kind of formality around the arrangements, will that be revised now?
I think, again, in line with what he would always have wanted, there will be, I would imagine, a minimum of ceremonial. Now, the fact that he's passed away at Windsor, of course, affects the amount of ceremonial that is possible, quite apart from the circumstances at the moment. He had no constitutional position, so there is no need for diplomatic and the sort of constitutional guests that you would get in the case of a head of state, for example, a completely different matter. But this has all been planned, and the finishing touches will be being put to that plan, but it is very much, or it will very much be a funeral based around the COVID restrictions.
Nick, once again, many thanks. Nicholas Witchell there, our royal correspondent, with his latest thoughts on what might happen in the next few days. Many have remarked on the gulf between the Duke's public role, always a few steps behind Her Majesty the Queen, and his family role, where his word was often said to be law. His influence on the life of the royal family over several decades can be seen in many decisions and reforms, as our royal correspondent Sarah Campbell tells us.
Great roar from the crowd outside Buckingham Palace.
While the Queen took centre stage in public life, when it came to family matters, it was Prince Philip who was in charge. When Elizabeth came to the throne, Philip had to leave the Navy. It was unusual in the 1950s and 60s for the man of the household to give up his career to support his wife and children. But he had little choice but to fit his life around her unique position. And, as their home movies show, he did so with gusto.
First-hand accounts that I've been told by people who were there at the time of Prince Philip not just bathing the children, playing with the children, but reading to the children. He was a hands-on dad.
His was an unusual childhood, split up from his parents and his 4 sisters, one of whom was tragically killed.
The pleasures of family life are enjoyed by the baby's mother and father less frequently than by ordinary parents.
Royal duties involved frequent foreign travel, but as Philip's family grew, he was determined to do things differently.
I always aim to be home during the holidays anyway, so that I can see the children. I mean, we try and keep the children out of the public eye, largely so that they can grow up as normally as possible.
What's this for?
In 1969,
What's this for?
Philip allowed the TV cameras in for a behind-the-scenes documentary. This was the royal family, as never seen before or since, reportedly on the instruction of the Queen. Decisions such as schooling were his. Gordonston, the Scottish boarding school, had suited Philip as a youngster, and so that's where he chose to send his sons. While in later life, Prince Charles praised the school's ethos, his years there, far from home, were difficult.
Prince Charles has his memories, and that when it comes to Prince Philip's motives in what he was doing as a father, it was to try to toughen up his son, to correct what he perceived as weaknesses. I suppose, ultimately, perhaps to recreate the self-reliant, self-confident boy that Philip was turned into by the Gordonston system.
Father and son did come to share common ground, however. The Duke passed on his love of painting and a passion for the environment and conservation. His relationship with his other children was more straightforward. The bond with Princess Anne was clear. Alike in many ways, she was outspoken and she knew how to deal with her father's similarly frank manner. He shared a naval background with Prince Andrew, both having served in fields of conflict. And he may have been disappointed when Prince Edward chose to leave the Royal Marines, but over the years, their relationship grew ever closer. It was to his youngest son that Philip entrusted perhaps his greatest legacy, the Duke of Edinburgh's award.
What's it like working with your father?
He doesn't, don't worry.
It's very easy.
He does his own thing.
And now the veil is thrown back and we can see the Princess of Wales.
There were difficult years when the marriages of 3 of his 4 children failed, the most public, the split of Charles and Diana. What emerged much later, to the surprise of some, was the extent to which he tried to help. During the breakup, he'd written to his daughter-in-law, and the tone of his letters and her replies revealed a softer, compassionate side to the Duke rarely seen in public. Dearest Pa, she wrote in 1992, that she was pleased to receive his letter, and particularly so to read that he was desperately anxious to help. He replied, If invited, he would always do his utmost to help, but was quite ready to concede that he had no talents as a marriage counsellor.
There was no doubt on her part that gruff and stern though Philip could often be, that his motives were of the best, and she appreciated that.
Into his 90s, public engagements became fewer, but family events like Princess Charlotte's christening remained a priority. In 2018, despite a recent hip replacement, he walked unaided into the chapel for his grandson Harry's wedding. 2 years later, isolating at Windsor, he was there for his granddaughter Beatrice.
A heavy programme of official engagements prevents the Princess and the Duke from seeing their son as often as they wish. It is only on occasions like this that they can enjoy the happiness of parenthood.
It was a long life where duty and family responsibility often came into conflict. The pandemic, as has been the case for so many families, deprived his loved ones of direct contact with him in his final months. His diminishing influence as the family patriarch coincided with a time of great public and private upset for the family. Perhaps the Duke's steadying influence and forthright manner were missed. His children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be united in mourning his loss.
Our correspondent Sarah Campbell there talking about the Duke's influence on the family, different generations of the family, and on his relationships with different members of the family over the years. Now, we heard earlier from some of the political leaders across the UK. We heard from the First Minister in Scotland and the First Minister of Wales, and indeed in Northern Ireland. Maybe we should add a little more now about the sense of the public reaction. So let's join our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith at Holyrood. The First Minister's message was clear earlier, Sarah. What can you tell us about maybe some wider reaction given the links between the family and Scotland?
Yes, well, people in Edinburgh feel an obvious connection to Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, and the confirmation of his death was posted on the gates here at Holyrood Palace, just as it was at Buckingham Palace this afternoon. And the First Minister said she extended her deepest sympathy to the royal family on behalf of all of the people of Scotland, noting the long contribution to public life in Scotland from the Duke of Edinburgh and saying it had left a profound mark on its people. The most significant and immediate consequence of the death of His Royal Highness was the immediate suspension of all political campaigning in the Scottish parliamentary election. That will not resume again until Tuesday. And the Duke of Edinburgh was a frequent visitor to this city. He always said he had a soft spot for it, dating all the way back to his time when he was stationed at Rosyth, nearby in Fife, during World War II, when he and some of the other sailors used to come into Edinburgh for a bit of R&R. He was also the Chancellor of Edinburgh University for over 50 years, where people said that during that time he provided invaluable support to students and to staff behind the scenes. And of course he had connections right across Scotland, dating from his time at Gordonston School all the way up to all those long family holidays at Balmoral Castle in Deeside.
Sarah, thank you so much. Sarah Smith on the many links between the Duke and the city of Edinburgh. Let's go to Belfast. Our correspondent Emma Vardy is there. We heard from Arlene Foster earlier, and indeed from the Deputy First Minister as well. I'm just thinking, Emma, what have you picked up today on the public's response to today's news?
Well, look, the Duke of Edinburgh visited Northern Ireland more than 50 times over 7 decades, and he was pictured at some of its most famous locations here, including with the Queen at the incredible Giant's Causeway. And it's quite fitting, really, that his final visit to Northern Ireland was in 2017, when he came to meet many young people who'd completed his Duke of Edinburgh awards scheme. But look, Huw, people have also been remembering today how Prince Philip continued to visit Northern Ireland during the difficult days of the Troubles, and that was all brought very close to home for him when his uncle, Lord Mountbatten, was murdered by the IRA when a bomb was detonated on his boat at Mullaghmore in Ireland in 1979. So it is significant today that among those people paying tribute to him was Michelle O'Neill, the deputy leader of Sinn Féin, of course the Republican Party that was once best known as the political wing of the IRA. Now, of course, in Northern Ireland in recent days, we have seen scenes of disorder breaking out, more reminiscent of the past. And there were a number of loyalist protests planned for tonight, which have now been called off by various organisations as a mark of respect.
Emma, thanks so much. Emma Vardy, our correspondent there in Belfast. Let's get the mood after this news in Wales then. Let's go down to Cardiff Castle, and my colleague Sian Lloyd is there. And of course, the Duke had been a frequent visitor to Cardiff over the years. Sian was Colonel of the Welsh Guards for many years. What are people saying there today?
Well, Huw, people across Wales have been paying their tributes to the Duke of Edinburgh, and at civic buildings, including here at Cardiff Castle, flags have been lowered and online books of condolence have been opened for people to leave their personal messages. Over the years, the Duke of Edinburgh visited Wales on numerous occasions, often accompanying the Queen, of course. But it will be a visit that he made in the immediate aftermath of the Aberfan disaster in 1966 that will be particularly remembered by many here today. At that time, 116 children and 28 adults lost their lives when coal slurry engulfed Pantglas School, and the Duke arrived very soon after that disaster. He spoke to grieving families and to members of the rescue teams, and he offered comfort to many. He returned a week later with the Queen, and the couple returned to Aberfan on numerous occasions over the years. The Duke of Edinburgh had a lasting relationship with Wales and its people, and he took a keen interest in Welsh life, from serving as Chancellor of the University of Wales to attending the opening of the Senedd, where tributes will be paid on Monday.
Sian, many thanks again. Sian Lloyd with some of the thoughts there in Cardiff and indeed across Wales. We've been talking about the influences on Prince Philip as he grew up, and of course his career in the Royal Navy as a young man was seen as a hugely important influence on his character. As a midshipman, he was mentioned in dispatches for his bravery. That's something that Boris Johnson mentioned today. And when royal duties displaced his naval career, he then worked to keep Britain's maritime history very much alive. My colleague Rita Chakrabarti looks at the Duke's lifelong attachment and loyalty to the Royal Navy.
Navy and life at sea were a huge part of the Duke of Edinburgh's career. It had been a British destroyer that had taken him, as a toddler, into exile from his native Greece. Two of his sons were naval officers, Prince Charles and Prince Andrew, taking up where he'd left off after his wife became Queen. Prince Philip joined the Navy straight from school. As a cadet, he first met Princess Elizabeth in 1939, when she visited Britannia Royal Naval College in Dartmouth with her parents. Active service came during World War II in 1940, as a midshipman on the old battleship HMS Ramillies. Years later, he reflected on life as a sailor.
You're exposed to the elements in a way which you're not ashore in any time, because you've got your feet on the earth, as it were, and you've got some sort of security, of shelter and so on. Whereas at sea, you're in a cockle shell in this enormous expanse of the ocean, so that tends to cut you down to size a bit.
In 1941, Philip joined HMS Valiant, operating in some danger in the Mediterranean. During the Battle of Cape Matapan, he earned a mention in dispatches for directing searchlights onto enemy cruisers.
We were hit by two bombs. The whole ship bent like that with the explosions, and actually bent sufficiently for some of the hatches down below to be jammed. So several people rang up and said, "Please, can you get a tin opener? We'd like to get out." You know.
Promotion followed, and a posting to a destroyer on hazardous convoy duty in the North Sea, before he returned to the Mediterranean in support of the Allied invasion of Sicily. At the end of the war, he was in Tokyo Bay to witness the surrender of Japanese forces. After his marriage, he studied at the Royal Naval College in Greenwich and was posted to Malta, where Princess Elizabeth joined him as an officer's wife. It was clearly a happy time for them both. In 1950, Philip was given his first command, the frigate HMS Magpie. But his active naval career ended 2 years later when the Queen succeeded to the throne. He accepted this momentous change in his life and simply got on with the job. But his contemporaries always believed that he could have achieved high rank.
I remember Lord Mountbatten talking to me when I was First Sea Lord, and he said, of course, if Philip had stayed in the Navy, there would have been great competition between you. I don't think the competition would have been very strong, actually. He would have got it.
Do you think so?
Oh, yes.
Royal duties were now his first priority. But the Duke maintained his interest in Britain's maritime heritage. And on the 50th anniversary of the end of the war, he was quick to leave the royal podium to march alongside his old comrades.
Rita Chakrabarti there with the Duke's very strong attachment to the Royal Navy. There's no question, of course, that one of Prince Philip's greatest contributions to public life, indeed, some would say the greatest, was the scheme that he established back in 1956, very familiar scheme, the Duke of Edinburgh's Award. At the time, the scheme was seen by many people as radical and pioneering, encouraging young people to explore new challenges, to take risks and to show their own initiative. As our correspondent Elaine Dunkley reports now, the scheme has indeed enriched the lives of millions of young people, even during this pandemic.
The Duke of Edinburgh's Award. Activities, expeditions and adventures. For millions of people, it has been part of growing up. It aims to give young people from all backgrounds a sense of achievement outside of the classroom through field trips and volunteering.
How many times do you think you got lost?
For these pupils at secondary school in the heart of Manchester, the experience has been life-changing.
Like when you go on Duke of Edinburgh, it's just a whole different environment. It's like green everywhere, like as far as you can see.
Even signing up for it was a bit out of my comfort zone because prior to it, I was quite shy and reserved and didn't really talk to many people in my year.
I've been working for a charity shop in my community, and I think definitely it's been a very interesting. You get to meet lots of new people, get to touch lots of interesting people, hear their story.
Had fun and made so many friends without, I don't know how I'd have gotten through my high school years, honestly. It's really, really good.
It began in 1956 and grew out of the Duke's own experiences at Gordonston. The award's ethos was rooted in the philosophy of the school's headmaster, Kurt Hahn, who felt that education should be about more than just academic achievement.
It was based on Hahn's theory that you shouldn't be a specialist in any one thing, and he felt that that you shouldn't concentrate entirely on academic education. His philosophy was that if you could get young people to succeed in any area of activity, that mere sensation of success would spread over into a lot of others.
When the scheme first started, it was considered quite revolutionary, but it also had its detractors.
I think a lot of organisations thought it was going to be a rival. The Scouts, the Guides, Outward Bound Trust, all kinds of people thought, oh dear, here comes another youth organisation to rival us. The cleverness was that it was a programme which was complementary and not competitive, so anyone could do it.
The programme has moved with the times. It started as a boys-only group, and even when girls joined, there was a gender divide.
Can you tell me how you'll be able to get instructors and adjudicators to teach things like marriage and make-up and all the other new schemes you've mentioned in the pamphlet?
Oh, make-up we've got no problem. Marriage might be a bit more difficult.
From helping at food banks to vaccination centres, during the pandemic, many young people have volunteered through the scheme.
Are you here for the vaccine, madam? All right. I think the Duke of Edinburgh is fantastic to gain, especially independence. Everyone can do it. Everyone's helping the community. Everyone's being active. Everyone's learning a new skill. And I think the inclusion of the youth is fantastic.
OK, guys, ready to go?
Throughout the decades, the awards have been based on physical activity, skills, service and expedition, What you choose to do in each category is almost unlimited. Then there are 3 levels: gold, silver and bronze.
It's his vision and energy that created the organisation that enabled many, many young people to be able to access these development opportunities. And he was an absolute sort of stalwart champion for young people's sort of opportunities and development right the way through until he retired. While this is and it's an incredibly sort of sad moment to reflect on his passing, we are incredibly optimistic about the fact that we can build on his incredible legacy, and the award will still be going strong many, many years from now.
Its popularity and success has spread across the globe, with more than 140 countries taking part. The scheme that bears his name will perhaps be his greatest legacy, a testament to the ideas and outlook of the Duke of Edinburgh.
Just a good reflection there on the worth of the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme, which of course has benefited many millions of young people. Let's have a final word at this stage with our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell. One of the big advantages, Nick, of course, today in an extended programme like this is to show lots of the story, lots of the images. Lots of people in the UK today of a younger age will not be familiar with the Duke and the role that he's played.
It's a generational thing, isn't it? I mean, people of our age will appreciate the colour that he brought to the national stage over so many decades. But he had a keen affinity with younger people, as we've just seen through the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme. 7 million people in, I think it's about 130 countries around the world have taken part in it. And I watched him not so many years ago at St James's Palace giving out the gold awards. And he still really enjoyed that. He did have this affinity with younger people. He once described himself as a discredited Balkan prince of no particular merit. This was a man from European royalty, born a prince of Greece, though principally of Danish blood. And he came to be one of the most influential and important outsiders to marry into the House of Windsor. He had a sharp mind and a sharp tongue. He didn't suffer fools. He could be arrogant and abrasive. Somebody once said there was a sense of danger about him, but the Queen was absolutely devoted to him throughout their 73 years of marriage. And you know, when finally I think the reign of Queen Elizabeth II does come to an end and we assess its importance within the long history of the monarchy within the United Kingdom, the name of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, will deserve great credit for the contribution that he made to the success and stability of this reign.
Indeed. Nick, once again, thank you so much. Nicholas Witchell there with his thoughts, our royal correspondent. So at that time, let's go to Nick, who's got the latest on the weather for us. Hi, Nick.
Hello, Hugh. This cold front has reintroduced Arctic air across many parts of the UK today, and that's going to lead to a cold weekend with some sunshine, but also a few wintry showers around. Along that weather front, we've had some rain today across parts of Wales, the Midlands and East Anglia. More of southern England will see some of that overnight. It'll also turn wetter overnight in the Channel Islands, but the cloud will keep the frost at bay, whereas elsewhere under clear skies, a very frosty night to come with still a few wintry showers into Northern Ireland and northern Scotland. So for the weekend, a high pressure sitting to the west of us will draw in the air from that cold direction, the north, but another set of weather fronts will just brush southeast England with some outbreaks of rain, perhaps into parts of East Anglia, but more especially in a line from Essex across to Hampshire southwards, and a keen, chilly northeasterly breeze with that. Whereas elsewhere, there's plenty of sunshine, just a few of these showers getting going again of rain, but also sleet, hail, some snow to higher ground, and there may be thundery in Scotland. And single-figure temperatures well below average for the time of year. It's a cold day. Now, Saturday evening and night, the rain will clear away from southeast England. Wintry showers elsewhere will slowly fade, and we're left with another clear start on Sunday morning, but another cold and frosty one. With sunshine, a few wintry showers, largely by the afternoon confined to England and Wales, clouding over in Northern Ireland, some rain, sleet and snow edging towards Scotland. A cold day becoming less cold next week, Hugh.
Nick, thank you very much. Nick Miller there with the weather for us. There is continuing coverage on BBC Two and on the BBC News Channel with Clive Myrie. And here on BBC One, we'll be joining our news teams where you are. I'll be back to later at 10. We'll leave you now with a blend of memorable images from the life of Prince Philip. Goodbye.